All right, buckle up for some serious legal drama today. We're taking a deep dive into a case in Texas. It's got protective orders, criminal charges, and really gets you thinking about free speech and digital evidence and all that. And what's really interesting is we're hearing this straight from the defendant.
Oh, wow.
Laura Smith is representing herself in court.
That's right. Yeah, we've got these court motions. It really gives us like a firsthand look at her perspective on all of this.
Absolutely.
At the heart of it is this protective order.
Okay.
It was issued against Laura back in February 2024.
Uh-huh.
And it was at the request of Karen Wheels. Now, protective orders are meant to, prevent harm.
Right.
But Laura is alleging something, well, something pretty disturbing. She's saying that she was actually coerced into dropping her own protective order against Karen.
Wait a minute. She had a protective order against Karen, so
Yeah.
this is getting complicated.
Yeah, it gets a little messy.
Oh,
And it
no.
raises some really important questions about how the legal system handles these situations, especially when both parties feel threatened,
Right.
Laura claims she was actually facing contempt of court charges,
Oh, wow.
which could have meant jail time
Oh, gee.
if she didn't drop her protective order against Karen.
So she felt like she had to choose between protecting herself and staying out of jail.
Basically, yeah. She felt backed into a corner.
Man, that's a tough spot to be in. And a serious allegation.
Definitely. And it gets even more complicated because Laura's also claiming that the protective order against her, this one, the one filed by Karen, is based on fake evidence.
What? Like, what do you mean?
I'm talking fake text messages. Even fake TikTok accounts, supposedly created to make her look bad.
Like, wow, this is sounding like something out of a movie or something. How could someone even get away with that?
Well, that's the thing about the digital age, right? It's pretty easy to manipulate this kind of evidence.
Right.
And proving that it's fake. Well, that can be really tough.
Yeah.
Really tough for the courts. This case is like a perfect example.
Hmm.
The evolving role of digital evidence and how it can be misused.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay, so we've got a protective order potentially based on lies.
Right.
Claims of coercion, is that it? What else is going on?
Oh, there's more. Laura's also facing separate criminal charges
Oh, wow.
for allegedly violating this very same protective order she's trying to get tossed out.
What? Okay, wait, hold on. So she's being charged with violating a protective order that she says is based on lies.
You got it. And get this. This is the crazy part. She claims that Karen and her ex-husband, Patrick Wheels, have filed over 50 false police reports against her.
50. Are you serious?
Oh, yeah.
What would their motive even be for doing something like that?
Well, Laura says it's all a strategy to make her look bad, to give them an advantage in their custody battle.
Oh, wow. So, like, this personal conflict is impacting everything. Their lives, the legal system, everything.
Exactly. It raises some unsettling questions about how easily these legal processes can be manipulated, especially in situations like this,
Right. Right. Okay, let's get into some of the details here. What's in these police reports?
Well, we're talking property damage, harassment, even claims that Laura violated the protective order by, get this, dropping off gifts for Karen's kids. Like basic everyday stuff twisted to fit their narrative.
Yeah, it's wild how an action can seem totally innocent in one context and totally suspicious in another.
For sure. That's the danger in these situations. It becomes this big, he said, she said battle, and finding out what really happened can be almost impossible.
Absolutely. So how's Laura fighting back against all of this?
So she's filed a bunch of motions laying out all her arguments in detail. And trust me, there are some juicy details sprinkled throughout these documents.
Oh, I bet. All right, let's hear it. What are some of the most interesting pieces of this puzzle?
Well, first of all, Laura claims that a friend of Karen's, Sarah Johnson, is the one who actually created all this fake stuff, the text messages, the TikTok accounts, the whole 9 yards.
Oh, wow. Another player enters the game. This just keeps getting more and more interesting.
Right. And she also argues that this protective order is being used against her in the custody case. Like it's preventing her from having a normal relationship with her kids.
Oh, man. That's heavy. Are there specific examples of how that's happening?
Yeah. She claims that Karen has actually encouraged people to provoke her online, knowing that if Laura reacts, it could be seen as a violation of the protective order.
So they're trying to set her up.
Exactly. And remember, she's doing all this on her own. No lawyer.
Yeah, wow. It's incredible that she's representing herself. But it also makes you wonder about how difficult it must be to navigate the legal system without a professional in your corner.
It's a David and Goliath situation for sure. Legal proceedings are complex, Having an attorney can make all the difference. I mean, it's a lot for anyone to handle, especially on top of this whole personal situation.
Right, right. Okay, so we've got the basic setup. We've met the players. Now let's dive into some of Laura's specific allegations. I'm particularly interested in this whole thing about her having to change her phone number 4 times because of harassment. What else does she say in these motions?
Well, I mean, changing your number that many times shows how bad the harassment really is.
Right.
And she gets into some pretty disturbing stuff.
Oh, okay.
She claims that private recordings of conversations with her son, they're being shared online.
Wow. That's a serious invasion of privacy.
Yeah.
And, speaking of privacy, what about this whole thing with the recordings?
Right.
With Sarah Johnson illegally recording conversations with her kids, isn't that a huge problem in Texas?
Yeah, absolutely huge. Texas is really strict about recording conversations without consent.
Right.
And if what Laura's saying is true, Sarah could be in some serious legal trouble.
Wow. So now there's a potential criminal element for Sarah, too.
Yep. It adds another layer to this whole thing.
It's like every time we peel back a layer of this onion, there's another layer underneath.
Exactly.
But let's get back to the legal stuff here for a sec.
Okay.
Laura's also claiming that what Karen's doing is actually stalking.
Right.
How strong is that argument, legally speaking?
Well, stalking is a serious charge.
Yeah.
And it usually means there's a pattern of behavior that would make any reasonable person feel scared.
Yeah.
So Laura would need to prove that what Karen is doing fits that legal definition. Like she'd have to show a pattern of harassment or surveillance or something like that.
So it's not just about being annoyed, right? It has to
Yes.
be like real fear for your safety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And proving that fear. Not so easy, especially with all the digital stuff. I mean, what one person sees as threatening, another person might just see as annoying. It's subjective.
So context is everything in these cases.
Totally. And that's why these disputes can be so hard for the courts to figure out. There's a lot of gray areas,
Absolutely.
And it comes down to interpreting the evidence, what people meant by their actions, all of that.
Right. Okay, let's switch gears for a second and talk about some of the legal terms that Laura uses in her motions.
Okay.
She keeps using the words coercion and duress when she talks about being pressured to drop her own protective order against Karen.
Great.
Can you explain what those terms mean in, a legal setting?
Sure. Coercion and duress, they basically mean that someone was forced to do something they didn't want to do.
Okay.
In this case, if Laura can prove she was coerced into dropping that protective order, that could mean the agreement she signed isn't valid anymore.
So even if she willingly signed the agreement, if she did it because she was afraid of going to jail, it could be thrown out?
Exactly. The court would have to decide whether she was really under duress or if she had other choices.
Makes sense. Laura also claims the protective order against her violates her First Amendment rights, specifically her right to free speech.
Right. Yeah.
How solid is that argument, especially since she says her social media posts were just self-defense against those false accusations?
Well, the First Amendment is a big deal, obviously.
Yeah.
But it's not unlimited.
Mm-hmm.
There are situations where certain types of speech can be restricted, like when it comes to protecting someone from harm.
So where's the line between protected speech and speech that a protective order can restrict?
That's where it gets tricky. The courts have to balance free speech with the need to protect people.
Right.
In cases like this, the judge would have to look at what Laura said, where she said it, and whether it sounds like a real threat to Karen's safety.
So just venting your frustration online isn't necessarily enough to get your speech restricted.
Nope, it has to be more than that.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be a true threat, like something that would make a reasonable person believe that harm was intended.
Mm-hmm.
And that's a pretty high bar to clear.
Got it. And Laura also uses this phrase, totality of the circumstances.
Yeah.
She says the court needs to look at that when they're evaluating her case. What does that even mean?
Totality of the circumstances
Yeah.
basically means the court can't just focus on one little piece of evidence
Yeah.
or one event. They have to look at everything, all the evidence, all the arguments, everything.
So it's like putting together a puzzle. You need all the pieces to see the full picture.
Exactly. And that's what makes cases like this so complicated. There are so many different parts.
Right.
And it takes a lot of work to figure out what really happened and what the right outcome should be.
Laura also has an issue with some of the wording in the protective order itself. She says words like annoy and alarm are too vague and therefore unconstitutional. Does that argument hold any weight legally?
Actually, yeah, it could. The Supreme Court has actually said something about this, about restrictions on speech that are too broad, especially in protective orders.
Okay.
If the words are so vague that a regular person wouldn't know what they're not allowed to do, it could be challenged constitutionally.
So the protective order has to be very specific about what actions are prohibited.
Exactly. It can't be this, like, catch-all thing that limits protected speech or leaves people guessing.
Okay, that makes sense. Let's talk about the potential legal consequences here. If what Laura's saying is true about the made-up evidence and the false police reports, what kind of trouble could Karen and Patrick be in?
Well, filing a false police report is a crime.
Right.
It's a big deal because it wastes police resources and it can lead to innocent people being accused of things they didn't do. Depending on how serious it is, Karen and Patrick could be looking at fines, probation, or even jail time.
That's pretty serious stuff. What about Sarah? You know, the friend who supposedly created the fake evidence. What could happen to her?
If they can prove she did that, she could be in trouble too, especially if she did it to mislead the court.
So there's a lot at stake for everyone involved here, not just Laura.
Absolutely. This case really shows that the legal system isn't just about settling disagreements. It's also about holding people accountable.
That's a good point. All right, let's look at this from Laura's perspective for a minute.
Right.
What could happen if the court rules in her favor?
So if the court decides that Laura's right, if they rule in her favor,
Yeah.
if they find that the protective order was based on, coercion or fake evidence, they could just completely get rid of it,
So it would be like it never even happened.
pretty much.
That would be amazing for her. What about those criminal charges, the ones for supposedly violating the protective order?
Yeah.
Would those go away too?
Most likely.
Hmm.
If the protective order isn't valid, there's no reason for the charges, right?
Makes sense.
Of course, the prosecutor could still try to go after her,
Right.
but it would be a really weak case without the protective order.
Yeah, I bet. So Laura could walk away from all this and basically be back to square one.
It's possible. But, we have to remember that courts have a lot of leeway.
Right.
They'll look at everything and make a decision based on what they think is fair.
Okay, so there are a lot of different ways this could go. It's up to the court to decide what happens next.
Right.
But let's step back for a minute and think about the bigger picture here. What does this whole situation tell us about the legal system and about how hard it is to deal with these kinds of conflicts between people?
That's a really interesting question. I think this case really shows how complicated the legal system can be, especially with personal emotional issues.
Absolutely.
The system's supposed to be objective, unbiased,
Right?
but it's run by people, and people aren't perfect.
Right. They have their own opinions and feelings.
Yeah, exactly. And that can lead to situations where people feel like they're not really being heard, like their story isn't being understood.
Yeah, like they're not getting a fair shake. This case also shows how important it is to have a lawyer.
Oh, for sure.
I mean, trying to navigate the legal system on your own is incredibly tough, even for people who are smart and can explain themselves well. Having a lawyer, someone who knows the ropes, who can fight for you, who can explain all the legal stuff, that can make a huge difference.
Absolutely. It's like trying to climb Mount Everest without a guide. You might make it, but it's way more dangerous and way less likely.
Right, exactly. And while Laura's doing an amazing job representing herself, it's definitely a huge challenge.
Yeah, the legal system has its own language, its own rules, its own way of doing things, and if you don't know all that, it can be completely overwhelming.
For sure. This case also brings up some big questions about how protective orders are used.
Yeah,
They're supposed to be a way to keep people safe, but what if they're being misused? Or what if they're based on lies?
that's a big problem, and courts see it all the time. False accusations can really hurt people. And protective orders, even though they're meant to help, can sometimes be used as weapons. It's a tough balance, trying to protect people from real threats, but also making sure the system isn't being abused.
Right, right. And we've talked a lot about the digital evidence in this case. It seems like that's becoming more and more common in legal battles these days. What are your thoughts on using these digital communications as evidence?
It's tough. It's a good thing and a bad thing at the same time. On one hand, these digital messages and posts can show what people were doing and thinking.
Right.
But the problem is, it's super easy to change them, take them out of context, or even make them up.
It's like the Wild West out there. You never know what's real and what's not.
Exactly. And that's why courts have to be really careful when they're looking at this kind of evidence. They need to think about where it came from, what it really means, and if it could have been tampered with before they make any decisions.
Absolutely. So, what are some things our listeners should take away from this deep dive into Laura's case? What are the big lessons here?
Well, I think it shows that the legal system, even though it's supposed to be about justice, isn't perfect. It
Right.
can make mistakes.
Yeah.
And it's important to make sure everyone gets a fair chance to tell their side of the story.
It also makes you think about how important it is to think critically, right?
Definitely.
Especially these days with information flying around everywhere.
Yeah, totally.
We have to question what we see, look at things from different angles, and not just assume things are true.
Absolutely. This case is like a real-life courtroom drama with all the plot twists and different perspectives.
Yeah.
It makes us think about the evidence, the legal arguments, and why everyone might be doing what they're doing.
Absolutely. And it leaves us with a lot to think about when it comes to how the law and technology are changing together. As our lives become more and more digital, the legal system is going to have to figure out how to deal with all the new problems that come with that, especially when it comes to things like online communication and digital evidence.
This is definitely not the last we'll be hearing about these issues.
No, not at all. Well, that wraps up our deep dive into this crazy legal battle in Texas. It's a case that raises a ton of questions.
It really does.
It makes you think about how complicated relationships can be, how powerful stories can be, and how the legal system is constantly trying to keep up with the digital age.
For sure.
Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time for another deep dive.